Joining me now live is Scott Rasmussen. This is a must-read every day. Go to scottrasmussen.com. #1 pollster in America. He is the man, and he's got some interesting things out today that we want to talk about. Scott, great to have you with us.
John, always good to be with you.
So we'll talk a little politics, and then we got to get to baseball because you guys are throwing at people again. You got Kevin Cash at the Rays all mad, so we got to get to that. And you got beat again last night by the Rays, so we got to go over this whole thing. But first, you got a stunning poll out that I saw that I wanted to get your take on that has to do with people and their fear of safety. I've never seen numbers like this on this particular topic. Scott Rasmussen, can you elaborate on this finding?
On their fear of safety. A fear that violence and riots would come to their communities. Yes, 48% of voters nationwide are concerned that what they're seeing in Kenosha and other places will end up coming to their community. It's a huge number, a stunning number. And what makes it really interesting is a lot of times I talk to you about polling data, and we say, well, the Republicans have this view and the Democrats have that view. And in this case, it might be the Republicans say they're worried and Democrats not. Not the case. About half of Democrats are worried, about half of Republicans are worried. And this makes it a really significant issue. It is something that it's not the top issue in the campaign. The pandemic and the economy are still up there, but this underlying current, the questions that are being raised and the safety issues are very significant right now.
Scott, when you talk about almost 50% of all people saying that they fear for their safety and they fear that these mobs and riots and looting and lawlessness is coming to their hometown, you can't underestimate the significance of that. I mean, to me, that's a stunning number. Don't you think?
And it's also, it's a number that might change people's mind in terms of how they'll vote, but certainly it might motivate people to vote. When people think they have something personally at stake in an election, they certainly get much more involved.
How deep is this? Why is this poll that you took recent, 50% of people saying that they fear violence coming to their town? How deep is this? Is this the inner suburbs, the outer suburbs, rural areas? Where does it go, Scott?
It is the most common areas in urban areas, a little bit more than the suburbs. Rural folks are a little bit less concerned about it, probably just because they're a little bit further away. I think it has, obviously, one of the reasons in urban areas is because some of the violence has already been there. But I do think people in the suburbs get anxious, when they see things happening in the cities near where they live.
Wow. What type of an impact is this going to have, you think, on turnout, the election? Let's extrapolate that, Scott, to politics.
So this past summer, I spoke to you one day, and you were really depressed because my polling had showed Joe Biden was ahead by 12 points.
Yes, I remember that day.
Yes, and at that time, the big issue was civil rights. I mean, we got to be clear. Anytime the civil rights is the focus, Donald Trump is going to be in trouble. However, what has been shifting in the public mind is as the protests themselves have changed their character. People understood the early rounds of protest, and people thought that most of the people protesting were peaceful and were, that there were a few bad elements along the way. But now, as the focus appears to be much more on violent action, the shift in terms of what people are talking about is more law and order and less civil rights. And the more that you talk about law and order and safety and stopping this violence, the more that becomes the topic, the better it is for Donald Trump. So now, my latest polling, he's down by 4 points among likely voters. Big change from earlier in the year.
Huge change because Scott Rasmussen, when I had you on this day, this was, I think, early in July, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Right? It was early in July. I was very depressed over it because I believe in your polling. You're the most accurate pollster in America. We were down by 12. Everybody started ringing the alarm bell in Trump world based on your poll, down by 12. And that was a real number. And so now it seems has happened is, Biden's ridden, the Democrats rode the wave of, like you say, the civil rights movement and George Floyd, and people were upset by it, and the activists. But now it's backfiring because now it's turned into mobs, gangs, looting, people fear for their safety, people getting shot in the street, Molotov cocktails, things burning down. And the Democrats can't put that back in the bottle. They can't put the genie back in a bottle. They don't control these people. You can't avoid going on the internet or seeing it on TV, except if you watch CNN, obviously. But if you watch any network or Fox, see these videos on TV that are scary, and people looking
Right.
at them, and your poll is bearing it out. They're like, well, it could come into my neighborhood tomorrow, and then what do I do, right?
And look, we're talking, when you talk about Wisconsin, a key swing state, you got to see how that's going to happen. Now, these changes, they don't automatically go in one direction. But this highlights the impact of events, the way that things played out. If we were still seeing a lot of very peaceful protests and raising questions about George Floyd and some of the civil rights issues, and it was more of a summer of love type of real feeling, well, then we might not be seeing the poll results we are right now. But John, there's something else going on that I think is really important to address in this campaign, and that gets right back to the questions of the pandemic and the economy. Right now, 27% of voters believe that the worst of the pandemic is behind us. Now, that's not a huge number, but you got to look at the trend. It's up a point from a week ago. It's up 7 points from 2 weeks ago, and it's up 12 points from the end of July. So people are beginning to think that we're getting a handle on putting this behind us. Fewer than half now believe the worst of the pandemic is still to come. And that's fueling an attitude that, rather than just we need to lock everything down again, we need to recognize it's going to be with us a while and adapt and move forward. And that's good for the economy. And the more people feel positively, or maybe I should put it the other way, the fewer people feel negatively about the ongoing nature of the pandemic, the better that is for President Trump as well.
Scott Rasmussen with us. Go to scottrasmussen.com. Sign up for his daily newsletter there. Get his polling. He is and continues to be the most accurate pollster in America. Talking about his new poll out, almost 60% of people believe it's time to adapt and move forward on coronavirus, which would mean living, right, Scott? Living, going to school, right, going to a football game, tailgating, going to dinner. Living is what they want to do.
And by the way, people living, with care, with recognition, and especially with caution around people who are vulnerable. I mean, there's this is not saying, happy days are here again, everything is there, everything is perfect, but that general attitude, yeah, okay, let's figure out a way to make it work. There's a restaurant not far from me here in Florida that did a really great thing. They can only open to 50% of capacity. So they took out half the tables. And what that means is you don't feel like you're walking into an empty restaurant. They just adapted. You still have that sense of this is a place a lot of people are coming. You can come in and see people, but they respect a little bit of the social distancing, and it works out just fine.
See, I love that. I love that so much better than walking in and seeing the big cards on tables. You can't sit here. COVID-19 can't sit here. Because that's like, it's in your face. I like the fact just take out, some of them can, obviously they're cemented down or they're booths or whatever. But right, I love the fact, if you just take 50% of the tables out, I mean, there's restaurants in D.C. I've taken Ann to where I wish they took 50% of the tables out because you're on top of the guy. Somebody's eavesdropping on your conversation because you're 2 feet away. So I love that idea. I mean, but that's how you adapt. My son teaches high school in Clarksdale, Mississippi. They're on lockdown still. They're doing Zoom. Nobody's there. But I went to one of the iconic restaurants there when I visited him. I just can't remember the name of it, but it's iconic downtown Clarksdale. And what they did, which was brilliant, is they didn't move any of the tables, but they put up these huge plexiglass barriers in between every one of the table. So it's almost you go in and you have a private enclave. And I thought that was the coolest thing they did. They invested a lot of money in it, but you feel completely safe, and it's private. So he said, look, I always thought about doing this because, people don't want to be on top of each other, and now you have these plexiglass barriers up. That's another way of adapting to the situation to your advantage.
That's right. Hey, and listen, there's something else that happened this week that I think is really significant. And I can even lead into it with a baseball story for you. But
Okay.
I wrote a column for the Deseret News and talked about the shock I felt as a young boy in the late 60s or early 70s when I read that Babe Ruth, decades after his death, had hit his 715th home run. And it just didn't make sense because, our generation, we grew up knowing that magic number was 714. Well, it turns out Major League Baseball had commissioned a group to go back and review all the box scores of all the old games and make sure the stats were accurate. And they found that in one game, Babe Ruth hit what we would call a walk-off home run. But under the rules in place in those days, there was a man on first base. And basically they determined that the game ended when the guy on first base scored, so they gave Babe Ruth a triple. And the guys doing the stat review said, well, that's ridiculous. He hit a home run. The commissioner eventually overruled them, said their mandate was not to change the way the rules were written in those days. But the point of this is the number of home runs that he hit was defined by the rules of the game, by what you were measuring. And the New York Times came out with a story this week, saying that the way we have been measuring the COVID-19, people who have it, is perhaps overstating by 90%, the number of people who are contagious. So on a day last week when the Times talked about there were 45,000 new cases, they said maybe only 4,500 of them should be in social isolation. The problem wasn't the counting. The problem was we were measuring the wrong thing. And this is the kind of data we're basing policy on right now. It needs to be addressed, and you need to learn from it.
Well, the other thing that came out from the CDC, we were talking about this earlier, Scott Rasmussen with us. Go to scottrasmussen.com, sign up for his newsletter there. Scott is, the CDC comes out and says, well, out of the 188,000 people who have died from COVID, actually only 9,200 died from just COVID. The other 179,000, or 94% of the deaths, had morbidities 2.6 average. So they had other things wrong with them that getting COVID contributed to their death through inflammation and stuff. But if they didn't have those morbidities, they wouldn't have died from COVID. So
Right.
We're also basing policies on, well, 190,000 people have died. No, 9,200 people have died, which is under people that die from the common flu on any given 12-month cycle. So we're closing schools, we're not playing football, high school athletics is canceled, and now we're finding out that if you don't have any underlying morbidities, your chances of dying are basically, they're under 1,000%, right? 9,200 people out of 330 million. And if you're a child, you have zero chance, yet we're not in school. So again, these policies being made, now this trickles out. So people like me look at this who have been questioning the whole COVID thing from the beginning, that it became political. It was about stoking fear, shutting the economy down, destroying Trump. And people like me that believe that now see the evidence come out and like you feel, I was vindicated. That's a problem.
I think first of all, you got to acknowledge COVID is dangerous. It's very dangerous to some people. 45% of those who did die were in a nursing home. So there are people who are frail. When you get something like this, it is going to be very bad. The next part of it, though, was I think the health officials, and this was something brand new. We'd never seen a pandemic like this, so they reacted because your job as a healthcare official is to protect safety, not to balance competing needs like the economy and life and other things. So they recommended a bunch of activities, and bluntly, in New York City, probably was important to take a lot of careful steps because 67,000 people live in Manhattan per square mile. I mean,
right.
The place is so packed, but that's different than rural Virginia. It's different than a lot of places in Florida. And I think the sweeping approach to everything across the nation is what created the problems.
Okay, let's get to a couple other things, Scott. I want to get to your polling, your most recent poll, where you've got Trump has now closed the gap with Biden nationally to 4 points, which is great news. That's getting within the margin of error. It was down by 12, so that's a significant gain. He's gaining, no question there. But let's get to the percentage of black voters voting for Trump. Emerson's got it at 19%. Zogby's got it at 12%. Rasmussen's got it at 7%. How can we have that kind of variance?
I don't know what other pollsters are seeing, and I don't know the details of their methodology. What I do know is President Trump earlier in the year, I thought, had a chance to pick up maybe 10 or 12% of the black vote. Would have been a big increase from 8% 4 years ago, and really a tremendous increase from earlier Republican efforts. But after Floyd George's death, it's the numbers just reversed, and now we're back at a place, at least on my numbers, where I think the black vote for President Trump, I think he'll be probably in the same range he was 4 years ago, not seeing big movement right now.
So that was 8%. So you basically now have him, although he's gained, down 12, now down by 4, no movement among black voters. That's you think he's still going to be at 8%?
Correct.
Okay.
But what I do see, and I got to emphasize something,
yes.
Turnout really matters. You know, if we have a turnout like I project and expect it to be, then right now Trump is down 4. If turnout is higher than normal, that is good news for Joe Biden, and a lot of that has to do with mail-in voting. Trump is leading by 20 points among people who plan to vote in person. He's losing by 47 points among people. And so this, becomes a very significant issue. Voter turnout, always difficult to predict, but in a pandemic, we're truly in uncharted waters.
When we talk about mail-in ballots, okay, there's a lot of confusion, Scott. I just want to I got to keep clearing this up. When we talk about mail-in ballots, they're all being lumped in. Absentee ballots are completely legitimate, and they're being lumped in with the states that are just mailing them out to all registered voters. Big difference. So most Democrats, polling is finding, they're afraid. They don't want to go vote in person. They don't have enough masks to wear, hazmat suits or whatever. So they're going to go the absentee ballot route. Those are legitimate, Scott. We've been doing that for 5 decades. I voted absentee forever because I don't know where I'm going to be on that on any given day. So that's legitimate, not to be confused with the states like Nevada and California and New Jersey that are just mailing them out to everybody, right? That's the difference.
There is a huge difference, and there's another difference. States that have voted by mail in the past are likely to have less problems than those that are doing it sort of on a spur of the moment.
Like Oregon.
Oregon or Utah. They have done some of these things. They've done it before. There's a process. They have the ballot counting down. There's a normal routine. When you all of a sudden take an election system and say, by the way, we're going to do it entirely differently this year, like anything else, when you change it, you're going to find plenty of unexpected surprises.
Well, we'll see what happens. Scott, I got to get to baseball. The Yankees getting beat again last night by Tampa Bay. You're 4.5 games behind the Rays. But worse than that, look, I saw everybody that follows baseball now saw 2 things. They saw the Chapman pitch in the 9th inning, 101 miles an hour, almost knocked that player's head off. By the way, he came back last evening and hit 2 homers. That's the way to answer that. But then the Rays manager, Kevin Cash, threatened retaliation. I've never seen this before on TV. And he says, hey, I got a bunch of pitchers here that can throw 98. I don't think this is a good thing. I think Chapman threw at the guy. I don't know why he would do that in the 9th inning with 2 outs. But the whole thing stinks to me, Scott. What is up with this?
Well, first of all, I'll disagree with you on Chapman, but that's a different topic. But look, I think it's bad. I do believe that in a bygone era, managers talked like that, but it wasn't on television, and they were in their clubhouse, and we didn't hear about it. And like everything else in the social media world, now these things get picked up. They are said in public. The other side hears about it, and it raises tension, and it ruins the game.
John Fredericks Radio Network. On that, we totally agree. Yankees 4.5 back at Tampa. Time is running out, Scott. You better start winning some games. John Fredericks Radio Network. Go to scottrasmussen.com.